Cosmic Geppetto podcast is brought to you by MuseGuitarist.com. For help creating your own amazing music, from advice, production, or awesome guitar work, contact Brad Hewitt at admin@MuseGuitarist.com or visit www.museguitarist.com. From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host, hey all you cool cats and kittens, Brad Mendenhall.
Hey everybody, it is a great episode of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Isaac Cabe from Crack.com joins me to talk about the Netflix documentary series, Tiger King. But first, Jarf is here to share how he is keeping entertained during the quarantine.
Hey, this is Jarf, and my streaming recommendation for you is the Disney nature documentary Elephant, available on Disney+. So, Elephant tells the story of a herd of African elephants making a perilous journey across the Kalahari Desert, and it's featuring some stunning cinematography, beautiful vistas, and as a bonus, it's narrated by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. So really, what more could you want? Definitely recommend checking it out on Disney+.
Basically, like everybody in America with a Netflix account and way too much free time because of the quarantine, I watched Tiger King, and I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to talk about it, but it wasn't like I wanted to reach out to the people, because the thing about Tiger King is everyone in it is terrible, but as I'm wont to do, I read Crack.com, and there was a fantastic article titled, "We Interviewed Carole Baskin from Tiger King, parentheses, 6 years ago." It's an excellent article. And it was written by Isaac Cabe, and Isaac was nice enough to come on Cosmic Geppetto to talk about it. It was a fascinating article. I'm really excited. Isaac, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a weird couple of weeks with the quarantine and everything, but I'm hanging in there. I'm staying strong. Yourself?
Yeah. It turns out these I love my children very much, but it turns out they're terrible little people to live with 24/7.
I have a side job teaching kids gymnastics, and I tell you, I miss my students there a ton. It's been a hard couple of weeks not being able to go in and see their little smiling faces too.
The smiling faces are great. It's the battles that happen that is like, ooh.
Don't understand the whole parenting thing yet, but yeah, it's best of luck to you through the rest of it.
There was a great tweet I saw. Somebody said, it's like, well, I've spent an hour and a half teaching my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old. I now believe teachers should be paid $1 billion a year, if not $1 billion a week. And it's like, yeah, there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
6 years ago, before any of this happened, before anybody knew who Carole Baskin was, and the people who haven't watched Tiger King, she is a very interesting personality who runs a a big cat sanctuary in Florida. You interviewed her, and I loved your article. A great perspective of you met this person before, unfiltered, because so many people who were on the documentary have, if not complained, have at least said, hey, that isn't the real me. That is, and it's something I've heard about documentaries before. You're not really seeing who they are. It's, regardless of how real life it is, it's still an edited product. You were an intern at Cracked at the time. How did you end up getting that call, and how were you going into it to talk to her?
When I first took over the assignment, another writer had been trying to pitch an article about taking care of exotic animals in the United States. And the previous people that writer had been talking to was raising like chinchillas or something like that. And our editors were like, no, we need to go bigger than that. Find somebody who's got tigers or lions or something, and then we can go from there. As I alluded to in the article, it really does not take a detective / genius to realize that it's going to be super shady. I mean, think about the type of people that are famous and own big cats. Siegfried and Roy, like, I can't really speak to their ethics or their morals or anything, but I mean, they've been bit. It's really ended a huge part of their show. And I mean, who else we got there? Like Mike Tyson has tigers. You saw it in The Hangover, right? Mike Tyson, again, I can't really speak to who he is as an animal owner, but I know that he lives in Nevada, and the prized pigeons that he has are in a building in New York. It's not like he's super hands-on. I can't imagine that his big cats were having the best life. I mean, if that's what it's like for the rich and famous people, then what about the backyard zoo owner in Ohio? It's not going to go well. There's just not the resources. There's not the infrastructure to take care of these kind of animals. And for someone to be desperate enough to try to force that to happen, it's almost assuredly going to have disastrous results. I'm from Ohio, which was for a very long time a hotbed of illegal activity in terms of exotic animal trade because there simply were no laws. My freshman year of college, so like 2 years before I talked to Carole, that was the Zanesville Zoo Massacre, is I think the way it was referred to in the news. But it was a guy had been cited over and over and over again for abusing these animals that he had. And there were a couple dozen of them, if I remember correctly, maybe as many as 50. And he released all the animals and then killed himself. And that's a public health threat. That's a public security threat. It's just not a good idea to keep these animals around. And when Carole was approached by the Tiger King people, she was under the impression that they were trying to do a Blackfish for big cats. Blackfish being the documentary that went into SeaWorld and talked about orcas. Big cats are really the same way. They need a whole lot of space. They really, really do. And they only work in certain environments. Those environments are not most of the United States.
That Zanesville incident you're talking about, that was even featured in, like, I want to say the first episode of Tiger King, and they showed that they killed all those animals.
Oh, yeah. It was just a horrifying thing to look at. I mean, even on the news, I was in college in Philadelphia at the time, and it was just, I remember being like, oh, great. There's already like no people from Ohio at my school, and this is what's showing up on the news to show people like, oh, that's where this hit kid's from. It was just kind of a sad thing to see on the news for a lot of reasons. I really wanted to tackle this article about big cats when I took the assignment over from the perspective of this is not an ethical thing that's going on. It's going to be a super shady industry, but I want to talk to somebody who is trying to keep an organization that's on the straight and level for a number of reasons. Because if you're talking to someone who's just a psycho, then they're not going to have a whole lot of valuable information about why what they're doing is a bad idea. If you're talking to somebody who gets in there and cuddles these animals, they're not going to have quite the same perspective as somebody who is making sure that there's always a dual barrier between them and the animals. Carole's operation, looking at her website, just a very cursory read through. She takes so many safety precautions to ensure that her workers and her family and everyone else stays as safe as possible in the presence of 400 plus pound killer cats.
What's been crazy is since the documentary came out, one facility near Myrtle Beach run by Doc Antle, I think I always pronounce his last name wrong. I've had two different friends who was like, oh, we were there. And then they like sent me pictures, like they have pictures on their Facebook page of them at that facility, one person like holding a tiger cub and the other person, his family, having their picture taken 10 feet in front of a liger. They said the same thing. It's like, we thought it was neat. We were going through that area and we had our picture taken. And who doesn't want to hold the tiger cub, which is completely understandable. I get it. Tigers are beautiful animals. And
I have to disagree with you there. I don't think it's understandable at all. I mean, have you had a puppy?
Yes, I have.
When you hold a puppy, like a 3 or 4 month old puppy, they're starting to teeth. they're biting you constantly. So I don't want to get bit by like an Australian Shepherd, even if it's a puppy. I don't want to get scratched and clawed at by a pup, like a baby tiger. That's stupid. No, thank you.
I completely agree, but I understand I understand the desire is like, oh, I love tigers and I've always loved tigers and having a picture taken. I get it. But so many of us didn't think about that until Tiger King. Regardless of if you want to pet the tiger or whatever, it's like, it's a terrible idea, not just for you, but for the actual animal. It's like nobody thinks about the welfare of the animal and how dangerous it could be for everyone involved because, hey, if that tiger or that animal attacks someone, and this wasn't addressed so much in this documentary, but I remember Grizzly Man, where the guy lived with grizzly bears, one of them ate him, and then that bear got shot and killed because it killed a person.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, I wrote another article at Cracked in our personal experiences section about what to do if you get mauled by a bear. Bear attacks are a very real thing, and I can't speak to big cats. I don't really know about their biology all that much, but over with bears, they stalk you. Once a bear gets a scent for a human, that's game over. I mean, they have to euthanize so many black bears here in the state of California or back home in Ohio. Black bears are, as soon as they get a taste for anything human, that's it. Got to imagine that starts with holding baby tigers. If they start being like, this arm tastes good, I don't think that goes away when they grow up.
You don't want them to start registering people as food. You don't want to be in that category because, I mean, I know you mentioned before, was it Monocore? That was the one that attacked Siegfried and Roy. They did not put him down, but he is now, which is something that should have been done before, he was put in an enclosure where he would never be in contact with people again because, okay, we know this is a tiger that now realizes, hey, if I want to eat a person, I'm more powerful than people. Like so much of keeping tigers from attacking is making them think they can't attack. And once they realize that they're higher up on the food chain, like you said, game over.
I mean, as far as the interview goes and everything, that was one of the things that drew me to Carole Baskin's operation, was that she's got this mission that she wants to end big cat captivity here in the United States. I didn't really get a chance to talk with her about this, but I have to think that there are exceptions for conservation, such as in zoos. I'm a lifelong zoo member. Every year of my adult life, I've had a zoo membership for whatever city I've been living in. I love to go to zoos, and I think that they do a lot of great work. But to call something like Joe Exotic's operation a zoo, or even Carole's, is a misnomer. They're not zoos. They're not doing anything in terms of real conservation or anything like that. They're not propagating species. They're not preparing them for any kind of release into the wild. Carole is largely running a hospice. That's functionally what it is. And as sad as it is, you have to kind of respect that.
Zoos are run by zoologists. They have professionals who have actually studied these animals and understand it. With Joe Exotic, the featured player in Tiger King, he was just a guy who liked tigers, and his staff was just people who liked tigers who didn't really have anywhere else to go.
To his credit, Joe was giving people who may not have had another lot in life a chance to have a real job and stuff too. Granted, he's paying them slave wages, but he really was giving them something to do. There is something to that. The intentions were good, even if the execution was not.
And that'd be really admirable, especially if he was like running, I don't know, a convenience store or something where the stakes weren't as high.
Exactly.
Now, Carole, this is something that I commented when I was watching it. She definitely seemed to have her heart in the right place. And yeah, she wasn't breeding these animals. She wasn't allowing people to touch these animals. So she definitely seemed to have a little bit more wherewithal. The issue I had is like, she still was just a very nice woman who had money, who was able to create this very nice sanctuary, but she didn't have the education or the understanding or any of the background to justify her running this. And they never showed in the documentary, and I don't know if maybe you have more insight, they didn't show in the documentary that there was anyone in her sphere who would be that expert. It'd be great if she hired a well-qualified zoologist who had experience dealing with these big cats to be running things. That'd be a whole different story, and she could be the money person. But that was never shown, and I've never seen anything dissuade me from that thought.
The Big Cat Rescue YouTube page is without a doubt just tremendous, and it's huge. And you do get a chance to see behind the scenes on a lot of veterinary care they do. I'm not quite sure how she sources the veterinary care. There was another point in even the trailer for the Tiger King documentary where they say, I think it's Joe Exotic's voiceover, where he's saying she's got an army of people working for her for free. A lot of those are interns. And back in 2014, when I was interviewing her, the idea of an unpaid internship was still very prevalent. I had been on the cusp of moving to Los Angeles for a 3-month internship and just kind of eating the cost of it because it was an internship and I would have been in Los Angeles for free. So like I get it from the unpaid internship standpoint. And a lot of the people that do come to work for her are like zoology majors. They're like undergrads or grad students or something to that effect. So they're happy to come in and get some work experience, even if she's not paying anything beyond just, providing shelter or something to that effect. I don't know exactly what all she provides, but I wouldn't say they're experts, but they're certainly more qualified than the average layperson.
From what you said in the article, you seemed like you liked Carole. Your feelings about her and your interactions with her, how did that compare with the person that you saw in Tiger King?
Those were not the same people as far as I was concerned. It seemed unnecessarily cruel to me to have to make anyone relive the death of their spouse. And that goes for both Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin on TV like that. It's just not, it's not good documentarianism, I guess. Is that even a word? I don't know. I mean, I knew that she had lost her husband. It's not very hard to find public documents about this in news stories. But I mean, that was never anything that I was going to cover in an article for Cracked. It seemed, like I said, unnecessarily cruel. The other thing is I am a student pilot. Like I'm learning to fly airplanes. So for the documentary to make the claim that it was not feasible for Don Lewis to somehow fly in small prop planes from Florida down to Costa Rica, I think they mentioned it would take 4 or 5 fuel stops. That's nothing, honestly. I've been flying small prop planes around Southern California, out in Texas, up in Ohio. You could probably skip out if you were being real careful, or if you were probably in Don's case desperate or not well in the head. I don't think she killed her husband. No.
My thing with that was, first off, it's a shame because that was obviously not the focus of the series, and it was just a little bit of amateur detective work that they were doing without bringing in detectives, without bringing experts on the subject. They were just saying, it was like, oh, this is what Joe says. And it was obviously a very weird relationship. But you know what? Sometimes relationships are weird. And sometimes people are combative. And that's not enough to heavily hint that she had something to do with it or that she was somehow involved without there being any real, again, it was just documentarians giving an editorial slant without bringing in it. Like
the evidence they brought it forward, I thought was circumstantial at best. I don't think any of that's super plausible.
My understanding, and I don't pretend to be an expert on this, I've just read a handful of true crime novels, and there's some family members that have been in law enforcement, so I know just a hair more than average. But when somebody dies, the first person you look at is the spouse.
Definitely.
I gotta believe if a millionaire goes missing, they're looking real hard at the spouse. So I find it hard to believe that if there was anything really credible pointing towards her, that it would have been completely ignored by the police. There wouldn't have been an investigation. That if there was even a modicum of evidence pointing towards her, that she wouldn't have been brought up on charges or anything. Like there would have been something that happened.
Yeah.
Unless there's more evidence than just a guy with an obvious axe to grind, Joe Exotic, going after her and saying inflammatory things, then you need to do a lot more than that. I liked the documentary, but I saw the problems with it, and I thought that plot line was unneeded. Aside from just showing Joe and some of the other people just how vicious they were. So if you want to say, oh, they say all these crazy things, but there's no evidence towards that, and then move on, instead of like having an entire episode dealing with it, I didn't think was appropriate.
Yeah, it was a very unnecessary and I would say, inappropriate sidebar for them to take.
What I really liked about your article, and I can't say enough, I think everyone should check it out. We're going to share a link to it. I give you so much credit because it wasn't just you saying, it's like, oh, that person who's really famous right now, I interviewed her 6 years ago and it was sort of weird. You also talked about a lot of the behind the scenes things. And as you said, you've been a member of zoos for so long. You obviously have an affection for animals. Just how crappy the situation is with the breeding of these animals and how amateurs shouldn't be doing this and the problems with the world of breeding big cats.
Oh, yeah. It's just, oh, man, there's not even time to get into it all. I mean, maybe there is. We're on a podcast. But the favorite list item, because that was what Cracked was, really making its name on 6-7 years ago, was lists. And typically we would have for these personal experience lists, even, 2,500 to 3,000 words. And what I wrote a couple days ago was barely 1,400 or 1,500. But the one line item that my editors at the time consistently loved was the fact that drug lords occasionally have guard lions. Man, that drives me nuts because it's not just like one time that this has happened and it showed up in Carole's sanctuary. It's like 3-4 times. A couple of them were cougars, mountain lions instead of, big African lions. And it's just, you can buy them real cheap as cubs. One of the things people don't realize about big cats is that from a developmental standpoint, again, I'm not a biologist here, they are kittens emotionally, mentally, and everything until they're about 3 or 4 years old. So if you go back and look at that famous viral video of Christian the lion, these guys who went to London, had a pet lion, raised him until he was a couple years old, and then released him into the wild in Africa, came back to visit 1 year later. I think the timeline on that was such that Christian the lion was only 3 or 4 years old. He was still a kitty. That was why he recognized his owners, was able to just go back and give him a big old hug and didn't kill him. That's what they do with the drug lords is they raise these big cats until they're about 3 or 4 years old, and then they get rid of them. So with the mountain lions, cougars, they just release them back into the wild. But for a big declawed Simba type of lion, they're going to go out onto the black market somewhere, or else just get euthanized, shot probably. So it's very, very upsetting. But it's also like, wow, there's lions inside these crack houses. It's just wow. So that was probably the first big fact that we were like, we have to put this into an article somehow, somewhere.
Well, what I found fascinating is you talked a lot about white tigers, and people love white tigers. They're so pretty and they look so different. And white tigers shouldn't exist.
100% should not exist. It's a genetic mutation that occurred once, like 75 years ago out in the wild. That little white tiger was captured and then just bred and bred and bred and bred until now we have, like, I think the stat is every single white tiger on the planet is cross-eyed. And there's further genetic developmental sorts of issues that come by as well. I think the still frame for the video that I linked to in the article from the dodo, I think it's Kenny the white tiger, and I believe he had Down syndrome or whatever the cat equivalent of that is. It was like a missing chromosome or something to that effect, and they don't know if it was bred in or if it just occurred randomly. But I mean, it's just really upsetting. They also have real nasty overbites or underbites, so they can't eat their food properly. And for a big cat that chews on bones and stuff all day, that makes it really hard for them. I mean, they're going to grow up weaker and undersized for a big cat. It's very upsetting, and people don't really get close enough to look at the eyes until you point this out to them.
It's heartbreaking, and it's so great that you pointed that out, because it's something that good documentaries do this and good humor articles do this, where they point out, you point out something like big and ridiculous, and it gets you to think about how that trickles down to daily life, where they've talked a lot about, I want to say bulldogs or animals dogs that they decided they found a trait in those dogs they liked, and they kept breeding it. And now you have dogs that can barely function. They don't breathe well. They have trouble maintaining themselves because breeders decide they like this certain trait, and they did to such a ridiculous thing where these dogs can barely behave like dogs. When you see it with white tigers, and I'm looking at the picture right now of this poor tiger that, it looks like it has Down syndrome. Cross-eyed, the form of its mouth, it was really heartbreaking. Well, that's what we end up doing to purebred dogs all the time, because we think about how they look as opposed to how is that poor animal going to function day to day.
Yeah, it's really upsetting.
I haven't asked you this. How did you like Tiger King? Because get a peek behind the curtain is like, okay, I know this person, not that you had a close personal relationship with Carole, but you were able to sort of see her in a normal conversation, and then the way she's portrayed in the documentary, I'm sure that made you think, it's like, okay, if I can't trust how she's shown, how can I trust the rest of the documentary? What was your feelings about it?
My jaw was on the floor the entire time. Where I realized, oh man, we're going to have some issues is man, to take you back like a few weeks here, I had seen the trailer for the Tiger King thing, and I ran to my roommate he used to be our interview coordinator, and I was like, hey, look, it's Carole. You got her for me for an interview. And then he watched the whole trailer and he went, do you know who that guy is? I tried to get him for you too. And then he pulls up a clip from Last Week Tonight where John Oliver is talking about him. And he goes, do you remember me saying I know him when we watched this? And I was like, wait a minute. Yeah. Oh no. And it was just like a snowball effect of realizing this is something I have to watch the whole thing of. And it's just going to be an absolute mess the whole time. And that was, I think most people's reaction is, what a mess. What a mess. And I mean, I really mean it. I couldn't pick my jaw up off the floor the entire time. I binged it over the course of like a day and a half. It was just a lot to take in. And I mean, how do I say this tactfully? Nothing was unexpected to me, but at the same time, it was still blowing my mind like every couple of minutes. I knew things were bad. I didn't know they were that bad. Obviously, a lot of it was played up for entertainment and for shock value and all of that kind of stuff too. But I feel like most of that actually kind of petered out after around episode 4. A buddy of mine from college kind of pointed this out. He said episodes 5 through 7 kind of turned themselves into a more traditional true crime type of story where they're like, okay, this is the crime that happened. We're about to go get our man. And it's leading up to, Joe Exotic's plot and eventual arrest. Ah, man, it was just a lot to watch and a lot to take in. And I'm probably going to have to go watch it again at some point just to kind of flatten everything out and make sure that I kind of get a full grasp of the thing. But yeah, as you alluded to earlier, like I had only talked to Carole for a grand total between the first interview that she had recorded of me, and I think I did one more little follow-up over the phone with her and a couple of follow-up emails. So grand total, I might end up spending more time talking to you than I did to her.
You're going to feel really weird if 6 years from now I'm subject to the documentary. So
please don't kill anybody. Oh, man.
I promise. I'm too lazy for that. That's too much effort.
I don't know that that's the response I wanted to hear. I'm not going to kill anybody because Joe Exotic also didn't do it himself. If you go by, all the evidence, supposedly he paid a guy to go do it for him. That's how lazy murder works.
I'm too lazy and I'm too cheap. So, and quite frankly, I just don't get that angry at people.
There we go.
I think we're cool.
I'm glad to hear that.
You would just hate for you to be the common denominator, right?
Oh God, not again. Yeah. Netflix comes to me and they're like, hey, you were on his podcast once, right? Yeah, no, so it was really a lot to take in. I think in terms of reality TV show production, they get an A grade. I think in terms of documentary production, they get probably like a B plus type of situation because they really, I think, took it back into documentary territory and out of the reality TV realm, like I said, through episodes like 5 through 7, and made it a little more grounded. Production values sky high. Like when I was pitching this to Cracked in the first place as an article, I think the first few times I pitched it, I was like, if we can get some really good photos, and Carole Baskin had a lot of photos she was willing to let us use. She has a huge repository. She had a lot of photos she was willing to let us use, high def, high quality stuff. Yeah, I was like, this is something that's going to look really, really bright and good on the front page of our website, and we should really run with that too. I think there's a lot of potential here for that. They didn't bite, but then later on, about a year later, I went to the Exotic Feline Rescue Center near Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm probably saying that wrong. I got people corrected me all the time. It's Terre Haute, whatever. It's another very well-run facility. The owner, Joe Taft, was interviewed by Vice about the year before. So around the same time, I'd talked to Carole. And Vice ran a fairly good thing talking about the greater big cat trade at large. And that was really kind of the model that I was looking for, was what Vice did. And Joe Taft runs a very, very good operation down there. His tour guide, who at the time, I think her name was Sophie, she also did a very good job of explaining things and, illustrating for me why their mission is important, why their mission is, hey, we're not going to touch these cats. It's effectively a hospice situation for a lot of them. And it just, I don't know, it was a very, very good operation there too. And I'm glad I got to see one of these things in person, because it is scary. It's alarming. The cats, they go after these cages. I can remember in EFRC, there was one cage near the back that didn't have any cats in it. It was under repair because one of the lions or tigers had run into the side of the fencing so often that it had just bent the metal really bad. I mean, it kind of reminds you of the power these cats have.
I have a membership to the Maryland Zoo. They have lions there. Watching with my kids, a squirrel hopped into the lion enclosure, caught notice, and went after the squirrel. And he ran away. I just imagine, like, how ticked off is that squirrel? Because, quite frankly, this is a squirrel in Baltimore. He's thinking the only thing he has to worry about is John Waters.
Right.
And he gets eaten by almost gets eaten by a lion. It's like, that squirrel's got to be ticked off.
Oh, absolutely.
Someone told me it's all happening at the zoo. I do believe it. I do believe it's true.
They're magnificent animals. You alluded to it before. You said it before. They don't belong in this country, in these environments. Now, some of these animals need to be, because of, for whatever reason. You mentioned in your article some of these poor things, when they were owned by whoever, ended up declawed.
And that's something worth talking about, even with your regular pet cats, is that when you declaw a cat, I mean, that's like removing your I think it's your second knuckle. If we were to cut off your fingers from like the second knuckle, something like that, declawing your cats is not a nice thing to do.
I have 2 cats here that run around, and they got all their claws, and we've had rescue cats that were declawed before, and they were fine, and that's great, but the decision was made not going to do that to any pet that we have. One thing, and I want to get your opinion, I just want to get your reaction to this. The thing that really stunned me, out of all the crazy things that was in the Tiger King documentary, is then at one point, they says, like, these tiger cubs, or even I think maybe full-grown tigers, they could go anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000. I'm like, $3,000 to $5,000, and I don't want to act like that's a small amount of money, but that's a nice John Deere lawnmower. It's crazy that a schmuck like me, if I save up long enough, could conceivably come up with enough money to buy one of these animals and get them from somebody who isn't checking out what you can do. Listen, my parents for several years went to the Westminster Dog Show, where they have like the highest quality purebred show dogs in the world. There's dogs there that cost that much.
Oh, yeah.
It's just terrifying that, oh my God, any idiot I know, and I know plenty of idiots, with a decent job that gets a bonus once a year, could end up going out and getting a tiger. That's so scary.
These big cats are worse than, I mean, you know the saying that like the 2 best days of boat ownership are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. It's the same kind of thing with these big cats, I have to imagine. You get so excited the day you get it, and then it's just a nonstop money pit because they're so expensive to feed. And then finally it's off your hands and you can like breathe again.
Yeah, because you mentioned celebrities. Mike Tyson was notorious, and it was played for comedy in the movie Hangover. But yeah, Mike Tyson in real life, he owned several tigers, and then he went bankrupt because Don King got all his money. There was even articles about what's he going to do with these tigers that are so expensive and you don't really want a pet that can eat you. Want to say, and I might be wrong on this, I want to say like Paris Hilton had a pet tiger for a period of time. And why? Yeah, they're not pets.
Even alive or dead, they're trophies is what they are.
So Isaac, first off, I really appreciate you coming on. I wanted to talk about Tiger King so much, but I just didn't want to say he's like, oh, did you see he has an eyebrow piercing and he's a weird guy. I'm glad we had a chance to sort of talk about like the bigger issue around this stuff that wasn't touched upon in the documentary, because the documentary was entertaining, but it was definitely made for entertaining and more of the murder mystery part. There's a real thing about this that can make its own documentary as well.
Yeah. When Carole was approached, as she said, by someone who was like, we want to make the Blackfish for big cats, I'm 100% on board with that idea. It's just that Tiger King is not that. And maybe they set out to make that kind of a documentary originally, but it very quickly spiraled out of control, and they just wound up getting so much more than they bargained for.
I'm lucky enough, I'm friends with a documentarian, and he has said part of documentary is like whatever idea you have, there's a very good chance that in a year's time it'll morph into something else, because you're following real life and you can't force it to fit into a box.
Definitely.
So that could be very easily what happened. But Isaac, I want to talk about you. You've written some really cool stuff for Cracked. I mean, I love this article. And Crack's a humor site. There's some laughs in what you write. It's obvious that you have like real affection for these animals and put some real thought into it. And Cracked.com, I think, is at its best when it's like, okay, we're going to give you something to laugh about, and it'll have the list format or whatever, but we're also going to deal with real things and talk about real stuff and sort of like laughs that make you think. And you do that so well.
Well, thank you.
Please talk about where people can check out your stuff and what your goal is as a writer and what you look for when you create a story for Cracked or wherever else that you do your writing.
I think one of the things that drew me to Cracked, like 9, almost 10 years ago, just back in high school reading, was that it was built on a different model than most of the internet. Like, yeah, we were doing lists, but our lists were based more on the idea of teaching you something. You wanted to learn something new from us, whereas I won't call anybody out, but there were a lot of other outlets that were like, we just want to remind you of something. Here's a list of 10 things that, do you remember this from the 90s? Like, I mean, yeah, I guess. What did this teach me? What sort of value did this add to my day? And people can place various values on their time, and that's fine. But for me, I like to think I'm a pretty smart guy. And so I was drawn to something that taught me something new, went for maybe a little bit deeper of a dive than something else and some other places, some other outlets. And I learned. I think that's a very important thing. What do I want to keep doing? I mean, that's ultimately what I want to keep doing with my writing is any means I have of teaching people. I'm at Cracked full time now. Before this coronavirus outbreak, I was set to move to our New York offices. It was going to be pretty exciting. I mean, we have some bigger plans at Cracked for expanding the amount of content we have. For a lot of reasons, there was a reduction in the quantity of new content we were doing the past couple of years, but we're under a new parent company that is like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We want to write more. We want more out there. So, I mean, today alone, I wrote 3 new pieces. I just stuff that's in the news. We're trying to cover the coronavirus stuff without covering it directly. We're looking at all these different weird side effects that it's having on people's lives. One of my favorite ones that I wrote today, I've been playing Pokemon Go pretty religiously since 2016. I didn't stop when everyone else stopped. It's got a thing out today where the parent company is looking at finding ways to take the walking requirements out of some of its very key features. For me, that means, oh no, their core premise of their gameplay is just crumbling underneath it. So we're covering the coronavirus stuff without getting at it directly. You know what I mean?
Coronavirus has had so many unintended effects or things that you wouldn't think of first. For me, it's fascinating how many musicians at different levels of fame and success are now like having their living room concerts. And it's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about that, too. It's one of my coworkers today wrote an article about how Hollywood is basically turning itself into public access TV. I mean, that's the closest comparison we can make to it.
Oh, yeah. My kids just watched Nickelodeon had a special where it was just Kristen Bell. I love Kristen Bell. I think she's fantastic. And she basically just hosted her own special where it was her recording from her home and getting her like famous or semi-famous friends to help her record from home. And it was like really interesting. And yeah, it had a very public access feel. People of different levels of fame have been doing that, and very interesting stuff. So, and I think Cracked, you guys are so well set to have those conversations and say, okay, everybody knows the general thing. Hopefully everybody knows, it's like, wash your hands and social distancing and all that. But here are all the little things that you may not realize are the unviewed effects of this.
Exactly. Like, when people want public health and safety sort of information, or if they need to know like how fast things are spreading or like what the death toll is, there are other websites they can go to for that. Like, they can go to their cable news and everything. We're never going to be that type of site.
No, and not everybody needs to be.
Exactly.
Isaac, where can people find more of your writing or follow you, your Twitter feed or anywhere else where they should be checking you out?
I'm writing pretty much exclusively at Cracked at this point. I've just never bothered looking for many other outlets. I haven't really needed to, but I'm on Twitter and Instagram both at Not Funny Isaac. My name is spelled Isaac. I mean, that's how it is in the Torah. That's how I spell it. So Not Funny Isaac. Let's think what else. I mean, just in terms of personal projects I'm working on, I'm trying to take my time here to work on some screenplay ideas that I've been bouncing around, but really haven't committed to very much over the past several years. So maybe I'll have some pitches together that I can bring somewhere. I don't know. It would just be nice to have in my portfolio. I like to work on stuff that's about small town, rural type of things. Some of it's very animal focused. One of my fascinations since I've been a kid was an animal called the thylacine, a Tasmanian tiger. And for a long time, I've been bouncing around ideas about what can I do to write about a Tasmanian tiger? What kind of story would I want to tell there? So I've got 3 or 4 different versions in various Google Docs and everything of, what kind of a story do I want to tell that centers around a Tasmanian tiger? Just something like that. I would encourage everyone to go read more and more about the Tasmanian tiger if they ever get a chance.
I'm looking at a picture of a Tasmanian tiger right now. They are really neat looking animals.
It's my favorite animal of all time. To take this back to the Carole Baskin interview and all of that kind of stuff, one of the groups that my interview coordinator at Cracked reached out to was the Kratt brothers, the guys who were behind their titular TV shows and Zaboomafoo. They're very well educated, very well trained guys, and they would know a lot about how this trade affects the environment, what it's doing to animals in the wild and in captivity, and they're very good explorers. But the first time I ever saw them on TV and what sparked my fascination with Tasmanian tigers was an episode of theirs when I was 5 or 6 years old, where they visited Australia and saw a lot of the native flora and fauna. Plot of the episode was, we're following a diary on a quest to track the Tasmanian tiger. And I was like, this is the coolest animal ever. And I'm so upset you didn't find one. But, it was 1995 or 6 or whatever. And it was just, it wasn't going to happen. It's a fascinating story if you ever get a chance to read about the thylacine Tasmanian tiger.
Looking at their Wikipedia page, because nothing ever is inaccurate there. The last confirmed one died in captivity in the 1930s, but
September 7th, 1936.
They are still unconfirmed sightings as recently as like a year or two ago. Because Australia is weird and there's animals all over the place that they never see because everybody lives basically by the shore because it's a terrible, deadly place to live in Australia.
If you wanted to bring me back sometime, I could do a podcast with you that's a good 2 hours long just about the Tasmanian tiger. I really could. It's just been an obsession of mine for years. And if I had my druthers, I'd really just vacation, go live in a cabin in the woods for a month and just bang out a really good story about a Tasmanian tiger. That would be my dream personal project to get to do.
Isaac, that sounds fantastic. I've enjoyed talking with you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. I want to have you back, and maybe that's the carrot that I'll have is like, hey, come on back and we'll talk about Tasmanian tigers as long as you want.
That would be fantastic. Thank you, Brad.
That wraps this episode of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Big thanks to Isaac Cabe. He was great, and we look forward to having him back to talk Tasmanian tigers. Check out his work on crack.com. Also, big thanks to Jarf. Joe vs. the Minute is an awesome minute-by-minute podcast. You should be catching up on it now. Upcoming to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, Kyle Crane returns to talk about the XFL. The conversation might last longer than the league's last season. Till then, stay marvelous.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net. McClunky!